High Chancellor Vorthak's 6 eyes twitched as he gazed across the massive council chamber. The ancient Corvani leader had witnessed 3 galactic wars, 2 species extinctions, and 1 particularly embarrassing incident involving dancing plague spores. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for what he was about to announce. Esteemed members of the Galactic Council, his voice boomed through the crystalline amphitheater, causing several smaller delegates to jump in their seats. I call this emergency session to order with the gravest of matters. A low murmur rippled through the assembled representatives. The elegant Zenthari ambassador leaned forward, her translucent wings shimmering with curiosity. The hulking Braxton delegate cracked his knuckles, a sound like breaking stone that echoed uncomfortably. Even the usually stoic Quantum Collective representatives seemed to flicker with interest. After extensive deliberation and, frankly, several panic attacks from our military advisors, Vorthak continued, his mandibles clicking with what could only be described as nervous laughter. The Council hereby issues Galactic Decree 7749B. He paused for dramatic effect, though mostly because his throat sacs needed a moment to process what he was about to say. Effective immediately, the species known as humans are permanently banned from participating in any form of organized warfare, military conflict, or what they so charmingly call quote-unquote tactical disagreements. The chamber erupted. The Zenthari ambassador's wings fluttered so rapidly she nearly achieved liftoff. The Braxton delegate stood up so fast his chair disintegrated. Somewhere in the back, a Glimmerpod representative began making sounds that their universal translator could only render as confused screaming. Order! Order! Vorthak slammed his ceremonial gavel, which cracked under the pressure. I know this seems unprecedented. Yes, Councillor Niamara, I see your tentacle raised. No, this is not a joke. And no, Ambassador Quilleith, we cannot simply pretend this never happened. The Quantum Collective spokesperson materialized closer to the podium, their form shifting between dimensions. My Chancellor, surely you cannot be serious. Humans are barely capable of interstellar travel. Their weapons are primitive. Their tactics are. They paused, searching for the right word, questionable at best. Vorthak's laugh was hollow, bitter, and tinged with something that sounded suspiciously like terror. Oh, my dear quantum friends, that's exactly what we thought too. That's exactly what the Zenthari Empire thought when they encountered them last rotation. The chamber fell silent. Perhaps, Vorthak said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the vast space. It's time I told you exactly what happened in the Kepler 442 system. What happened when we sent humans to fight a war we assumed they couldn't possibly win? 6 rotations ago, the Zenthari Empire was the galaxy's most feared military force. And why wouldn't they be? These weren't your average space bullies. No, the Zenthari had perfected the art of conquest down to a science. Literally. They had equations for it. Their battle fleets moved like clockwork across the galaxy, each ship a masterpiece of military engineering. Plasma cannons that could melt asteroids, energy shields that laughed at conventional weapons, and AI tactical systems that could predict enemy movements 17 steps ahead. They conquered worlds the way most species conquered their morning routine, efficiently, predictably, and with barely a second thought. The peaceful trading colonies of the Outer Rim never stood a chance. The Zenthari would arrive, demand surrender, wait exactly 4.7 standard minutes for a response, then systematically dismantle any resistance. Planet after planet fell to their perfectly orchestrated war machine. Surrender was logical. Resistance was mathematically futile. Which is exactly why the Galactic Council found itself in such a delightfully awkward position. We need mercenaries, declared Councillor Niamara during that fateful council session, her tentacles writhing with what passed for determination among her species. Someone expendable. Someone we won't miss if the Zenthari decide to make examples of them. And that's when someone, and to this day nobody wants to admit who, suggested the humans. Oh, how we laughed. Humans. Those barely spacefaring primates from that little blue marble in the Sol system. They'd only been part of the galactic community for what, 50 rotations. Their ships still used chemical propulsion, for crying out loud. Their weapons were kinetic projectiles, metal slugs, thrown really, really fast. Perfect, the Council agreed. Send the humans. If they succeed against impossible odds, wonderful. If they get obliterated, well, at least it'll buy us time to think of a real solution. So we contacted Earth's representatives. Admiral Kelra Voss answered our call, a stern-faced human female with graying hair and eyes that seemed to find everything slightly amusing. Beside her stood General Marcus Cole, a mountain of a man who looked like he bench-pressed asteroids for fun. Let me get this straight, Admiral Voss said, leaning back in her chair during the holoconference. You want us to fight the Zenthari Empire? The same empire that just steamrolled through 17 star systems in 2 months. Correct, Counselor Nim Ara confirmed. We'll provide intelligence support and tactical analysis, but we need boots on the ground, so to speak. General Cole scratched his jaw, which produced a sound like sandpaper on concrete. And what's our compensation for this suicide mission? Standard mercenary rates, Vorthak replied, plus salvage rights to any Zenthari technology you manage to capture. The two humans exchanged a look. Then Admiral Voss smiled. It wasn't a particularly reassuring smile. In fact, looking back, it should have been our first warning. When do we start? She asked. Oh, if only we had known. If only we had realized that humans don't approach war the way civilized species do. They don't follow the rules. They don't respect the established protocols of military engagement. They improvise. The Zenthari war machine prepared for battle the way a master chef prepares a 5-course meal, methodically, precisely, and with absolute confidence in the outcome. Commander Thexval, a 7-foot-tall specimen of Zenthari military perfection, stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Inevitable Victory. Yes, they actually named their ships things like that. Subtle they were not. Battle Group Alpha, report status. His voice resonated through the command center with the authority of someone who had never lost a single engagement. All systems optimal, Commander. Plasma batteries charged to maximum. Energy shields at full capacity. Tactical AI reports 99.7% probability of victory within the first hour of engagement. Thexval's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. Around him, banks of holographic displays showed the perfect formation of 43 Zenthari battleships, each one a floating fortress of destruction. Their hulls gleamed with adaptive armor that could redistribute kinetic energy. Their weapon arrays could glass a continent. Their shield generators could withstand the output of a small sun. Everything was proceeding according to the manual. Chapter 7, Section 4, Overwhelming Force Against Inferior Opposition. It was almost boring. Then the human fleet arrived. Commander, his tactical officer's voice carried a note of confusion that had never been heard on a Zenthari bridge before. Long-range sensors are detecting the human fleet. But, sir, there appears to be some kind of error in our readings. Elaborate. Sir, they're showing only 12 ships. 12. And they're really small, sir. Thexval's secondary eyes focused on the tactical display. Indeed, 12 tiny blips appeared at the edge of sensor range. Compared to the Zenthari vessels, they looked like insects approaching a herd of grazing beasts. Are you certain these are military vessels? He asked, genuinely perplexed. Scanning now, sir. Confirmed. These appear to be their entire battle fleet. Hull composition suggests steel and titanium alloys, primitive chemical propulsion systems. In kinetic weapons only. No energy shields detected. The bridge fell silent, except for the gentle hum of perfectly calibrated machinery. Then Thexval began to laugh. It started as a low rumble and built into a full-throated roar that echoed through the command center. Steel and titanium. Chemical rockets. By the void, they're not even using plasma weapons. He wiped a tear from his primary eye. Tactical, what's our projected engagement time? At current approach vectors, 17 minutes to effective weapons range, sir. Excellent. Signal the fleet. All ships maintain formation. We'll end this quickly and cleanly. These humans will barely qualify as target practice. But down in the human fleet, things were proceeding rather differently. Admiral Voss stood in the cramped bridge of the U.S. Tenacious, watching her crew work with the kind of organized chaos that would have given Zenthari commanders severe anxiety disorders. Technicians were jury-rigging equipment, engineers were muttering about making this work somehow. And her tactical officer was doing something with duct tape and what appeared to be a coffee maker. "Admiral, we're picking up their communications," reported Lieutenant Maya Santos, her fingers dancing across a control panel that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts. "They're laughing at us, ma'am." "Of course they are," Voss replied cheerfully. "Marcus, how are the preparations coming along?" General Cole's voice crackled over the comm from the U.S. stubborn. "Well, we've managed to strap mining charges to half the asteroids in this belt. Tommy figured out how to turn the waste reclamation system into a projectile launcher. He and Jenkins somehow convinced the reactor to output about 30% more power than it's supposed to. Is that safe? Absolutely not. But it should give us the edge we need for about 15 minutes before everything explodes." Admiral Voss nodded, as if this was perfectly reasonable military planning. "Standing. Signal all ships. Remember, people, we're not trying to fight them the way they expect. We're going to fight them the way we do everything else." "Which is how, exactly?" asked Santos. Voss smiled that same unsettling smile she'd given the Galactic Council. Badly, loudly, and with absolutely no regard for proper procedure. The battle began exactly as every Zenthari engagement had for the past 3 centuries. Overwhelming. Precise. Utterly predictable. "All ships, commence primary bombardment," Commander Thexval ordered, his voice carrying the bored confidence of someone swatting flies. "Standard formation. Target their largest vessel first." 43 Zenthari battleships opened fire simultaneously. The void erupted in brilliant streams of plasma that could have melted moons. Energy beams lanced across space with mathematical precision, converging on the human flagship with enough concentrated firepower to vaporize a small city. The humans did something unexpected. They dodged. Not with elegant evasive maneuvers or sophisticated defensive systems, but with what could only be described as frantically throwing their ships in random directions while screaming over the radio. The U.S. Tenacious barrel rolled like a drunken whale, somehow slipping between plasma streams that should have been impossible to avoid. What the Thexval's tactical officer stared at his instruments in confusion. "Sir, their movement patterns don't match any known evasion algorithms. Our targeting systems can't get a lock." "Impossible. Recalibrate and fire again." The second volley missed even worse than the first. The humans were moving like they were having seizures, their ships weaving and spinning in patterns that made no tactical sense whatsoever, except it was working. "Admiral, they're getting frustrated." Lieutenant Santos reported from her station, barely audible over the sound of something sparking behind her. "Their formation is starting to break up." Admiral Voss gripped her command chair as the ship lurched violently to port. "Outstanding. Phase 2, people. Let's show them what human engineering can really do." That's when the asteroid started moving. Commander Thexval watched in growing bewilderment as chunks of rock throughout the asteroid belt suddenly changed course, accelerating toward his fleet with purpose. His sensors couldn't detect any propulsion systems, any guidance mechanisms, any logical explanation for what he was seeing. "Sir, impact in 30 seconds on multiple ships. Recommend evasive action." Evasive action? From rocks. But even as he spoke, Thexval realized these weren't ordinary asteroids. They were moving too fast, too precisely. "All ships, emergency maneuvers. Avoid those. The first asteroid struck the ZFS overwhelming force amidships. The battleship's shields flared and held, easily absorbing the kinetic impact. Thexval almost laughed with relief. Then the asteroid exploded. Not with the gentle puff of vaporized rock he expected, but with a blast that punched straight through adaptive armor and energy shields like they were made of tissue paper. The explosion wasn't plasma or energy-based. It was crude, chemical, primitive, and it worked. Mining charges. His tactical officer gasped. They strapped mining explosives to asteroids and used them as guided missiles. 3 more battleships staggered under similar impacts. The Asian maybe in the labs. What is his time, yo? The Zenthari shields, designed to deflect energy weapons and redistribute kinetic force, had no protocols for dealing with rocks that exploded into shaped charges on contact. Impossible, Thexval muttered. You can't guide asteroids. You can't. Sir, picking up massive EM signatures from the human ships. They're using some kind of magnetic field generators. Of course they were. The humans had turned the entire asteroid belt into a weapon, using magnetic fields to hurl explosive-laden rocks at velocities that should have torn them apart. It was crude, inelegant, and completely insane. It was also devastatingly effective. Return fire. All ships, concentrate on. The human fleet had vanished. Not literally vanished, but scattered throughout the asteroid field like schools of fish, using chunks of rock as cover while their magnetic systems continued hurling improvised missiles. The Zenthari targeting systems, designed for clean ship-to-ship combat, couldn't distinguish between human vessels and floating debris. Sir, the humans are using our own plasma fire against us. They're positioning asteroids to reflect our shots. Thexval spun toward his tactical display. Sure enough, several human ships were hiding behind specially positioned rocks, using the asteroid's metallic content to bounce Zenthari plasma fire back at the fleet. His own weapons were being turned against him. This is impossible, he roared. They're barely capable of spaceflight. Their technology is primitive. Sir, incoming transmission from the human flagship. Admiral Voss appeared on the main screen, her bridge sparking and smoking behind her, her crew running around like maniacs, and her smile wider than ever. Commander Thexval, I presume? Love the ship names, by the way. Very subtle. I'm Admiral Kelra Voss, and I wanted to thank you for this learning experience. Learning experience? Oh yes. See, we've never fought a proper space battle before. Everything we know about combat comes from atmospheric warfare, and frankly, we've been making it up as we go along. But you've been very educational. Hey, behind her, someone shouted, Admiral, the toilet launcher is ready. Excellent. Commander, you might want to duck. The transmission cut just as every human ship simultaneously ejected their waste processing systems toward the Zenthari fleet. The improvised projectiles, filled with a mixture of biological waste and chemical propellants, splattered across energy shields and sensor arrays, blinding dozens of ships and creating a smell that somehow transmitted through vacuum. They're attacking us with sewage. The tactical officer gasped. But the worst part wasn't the indignity. It was the fact that it worked. The waste was interfering with sensor systems, the chemical components were eating through hull plating, and the Zenthari fleet was effectively blind and gagging. That's when the humans attacked for real. 12 tiny ships emerged from the asteroid field like angry hornets, their kinetic weapons spitting metal slugs at velocities that turned simple steel into armor-piercing hell. They moved between the Zenthari ships like they were dancing, never where the enemy expected, always where they could do the most damage. Commander Thexval watched his perfectly orchestrated fleet crumble under an assault that defied every principle of military science. The humans weren't following any tactical manual. They were making it up, improvising, adapting in real time to whatever the Zenthari threw at them. And they were winning. The end came with all the dignity of a glimmer pod trying to perform ballet in a hurricane. Commander Thexval stood on his bridge, watching his tactical display with the expression of someone whose entire worldview had just been fed through a matter disintegrator. 17 of his battleships were dead in space. 8 more were limping away with hull breaches that shouldn't have been possible. His flagship's primary weapons were offline after a human kinetic round, a simple chunk of tungsten, had somehow punched through 3 layers of adaptive shielding and lodged itself in the plasma conduit assembly. "Sir," his communications officer said, her voice barely above a whisper, "the fleet is requesting permission to retreat." Retreat. The word hung in the air like a toxic gas leak. The Zenthari Empire had never retreated, ever. In 3 centuries of conquest, they had never even considered the possibility that retreat might be necessary. "Sir?" the officer pressed. Thixval looked at his display one more time. The human ships were still dancing through the wreckage of his formation, their crews whooping and hollering over open channels like they were at some kind of festival. One of them was playing music. Loud, obnoxious music that his universal translator insisted was something called rock and roll. "Signal the fleet," he said, the words feeling like broken glass in his throat. "General retreat. All ships withdraw to minimum safe distance." The Zenthari war machine, that perfect instrument of galactic conquest, turned and ran. Halfway across the galaxy, the Galactic Council observers watched their instruments with the kind of stunned silence usually reserved for witnessing the heat death of the universe. Counselor Nim Ara's tentacles had tied themselves into knots, and her aide had to pour sedatives into her breathing apparatus just to keep her conscious. "This is impossible," she kept repeating. The calculations were clear. The Zenthari had overwhelming technological superiority. The humans were supposed to lose. They were supposed to die heroically and buy us time. The quantum collective representative flickered between dimensions so rapidly they resembled a strobe light. "Our probability matrices are showing errors. This outcome had a statistical chance of 0.0000003%. It shouldn't have happened." "And yet," observed Ambassador Quill Eth dryly, "there it is." On the main display, the human fleet was regrouping around their flagship. Their ships looked like they'd been through a blender, held together with what appeared to be metal tape and sheer stubbornness. But they were intact. They were victorious. And they were celebrating. "He was tenacious to all ships," Admiral Voss's voice crackled through the communication array. "Outstanding work, people. Jenkins, I owe you a beer for that reactor modification. Santos, remind me to recommend you for promotion after we figure out how to explain this in our after-action report." "Admiral," came General Cole's voice from another ship, "what do we do with all this Zenthari tech floating around? Some of these weapon systems are still intact." "Salvage rights, Marcus. Council gave us salvage rights. Load up everything that isn't nailed down, and if it is nailed down, find a crowbar." The observers listened to this casual conversation with growing horror. The humans were treating their impossible victory like it was just another day at the office. They were cracking jokes, making shopping lists of alien technology, and someone was apparently cooking lunch. The Admiral Voss, Counselor Nim Ara finally managed to transmit, "This is Galactic Council Observer Station 7. We need to debrief this engagement immediately." "Oh, hey there, Council folks. Sure thing. Give us about an hour to patch up our ships and collect our new toys, then we'll swing by for a chat." "Admiral, do you realize what you've just accomplished? You've defeated the Zenthari Empire, the most advanced military force in the galaxy." There was a pause, then the sound of muffled laughter. With respect, they weren't that advanced. Half their systems shut down when we threw garbage at them. Their targeting computers couldn't handle random movement patterns. And their shields? Apparently nobody ever tested them against good old-fashioned explosives. The communication channel went quiet except for what sounded like someone in the background shouting about finding a really shiny particle cannon thing. 3 days later, the Zenthari survivors arrived at the nearest council station. Commander Thexval's official report would later become required reading at military academies across the galaxy, though mostly as an example of what not to put in official documents. They don't fight like soldiers, his testimony began. They fight like natural disasters with weapons. Nothing they did made sense according to established military doctrine. They used sewage as a weapon. Sewage. They turned asteroids into guided missiles using magnetic fields and mining equipment. They bounced our own plasma fire back at us, using rocks. The psychological evaluation team noted that Commander Thexval developed a nervous twitch whenever anyone mentioned creative problem-solving or thinking outside the box. His tactical officer's testimony was even more disturbing. They were enjoying themselves. Even when their ships were falling apart, even when they were outnumbered 4-1, they were laughing and making jokes. What kind of species finds mortal combat amusing? But perhaps the most chilling testimony came from Sub-Commander Vexnith, whose ship had been the first to retreat. They adapt faster than our computers can calculate responses. Every time we developed a counter to their tactics, they had already moved on to something else. It was like fighting an opponent who could read our minds, except instead of reading our minds, they were just making things up as they went along. The report concluded with a recommendation that would change galactic warfare forever. Under no circumstances should the human species be engaged in military conflict. They represent a clear and present danger to the established order of civilized warfare. And that's when the Galactic Council realized they had a problem. A big, human-shaped problem that was currently joy-riding around the galaxy in salvaged Zenthari warships, teaching their children to fly by using the video game method, and asking if anyone wanted to buy some slightly used plasma cannons. The emergency session convened exactly 17 hours after the last Zenthari survivor had finished their testimony and been sedated for their own psychological well-being. The chair recognizes Ambassador Quill Eth of the Cytherian Collective, High Chancellor Vortak announced, his voice carrying the weight of someone who hadn't slept in 3 rotations. Quill Eth's translucent wings shimmered with agitation. Honored colleagues, we face an unprecedented crisis. The humans have proven that superior technology means nothing against whatever it is they do instead of military strategy. Chaos, interjected the Braxton delegate, his massive frame trembling with what might have been fear or rage. They've weaponized chaos itself. Our combat algorithms are useless against opponents who don't follow algorithms. The Quantum Collective representative flickered anxiously. We've run simulations. Millions of them. In every scenario where humans engage in large-scale conflict, the established order collapses. They don't just win battles, they rewrite the fundamental principles of how battles are supposed to work. Councillor Neem Ara, her tentacles still showing signs of nervous nodding, addressed the chamber. I've reviewed the tactical footage 17 times. They used a waste processing system as a weapon. They turned garbage into a strategic advantage. What's to stop them from weaponizing anything else? Our own technology, our infrastructure, our expectations, finished Ambassador Quill Eth quietly. They weaponized our expectations. We expected them to fight like civilized beings. Instead, they fought like humans. The Quantum Collective representative completed the thought with a shudder that rippled across dimensions. High Chancellor Vortak cleared his throat. The motion before us is clear. Galactic Decree 7749B, the permanent prohibition of human involvement in any form of organized military conflict. The vote was swift and decisive. 47 species voted in favor. 0 opposed. 3 abstained, and only because they were still in shock. When the Council contacted Earth to inform them of the decision, the response was typically human. Admiral Voss appeared on the holographic display, sitting in what appeared to be a salvaged Zenthari command chair, her feet propped up on a console that was probably worth more than most planets' annual budgets. So let me get this straight, she said, taking a sip of something steaming from a mug that looked suspiciously like a repurposed plasma containment unit. You're banning us from participating in wars because we're too good at them? That's one way to put it, Vorthak replied carefully. And this is legally binding across all member species? Absolutely. Any species that engages humans in military conflict will face immediate expulsion from the Council and total economic sanctions. Admiral Voss was quiet for a moment, then began to laugh. It started as a chuckle and built into full-blown hysteria. In the background, other human voices joined in until the entire bridge was filled with the sound of uncontrolled laughter. Admiral? Vorthak ventured. Is there something amusing about this situation? Oh, Chancellor, Voss said, wiping tears from her eyes, you beautiful, naive collection of civilized species. Do you know what you've just done? The chamber waited in tense silence. You've just made war illegal for everyone except us. See, we're not council members, we're mercenaries. And now, according to your own laws, we're the only ones who can legally fight. The implications hit the assembled delegates like a cargo hauler traveling at relativistic speeds. But surely, Councillor Niamim Ara stammered, surely you wouldn't. Wouldn't what? Offer our services to the highest bidder? Freelance our particular brand of creative problem-solving to anyone willing to pay? Admiral Voss's smile was radiant and terrifying. Chancellor, you've just given us a monopoly on the galaxy's most profitable industry. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. High Chancellor Vorthak looked out across the assembled delegates, his 6 eyes taking in the collective expression of dawning horror that had settled over the chamber like a toxic cloud. And that, esteemed colleagues, is why Galactic Decree 7749b exists, he said, his voice carrying the resigned tone of someone explaining why you don't feed tribbles after midnight. We attempted to solve a military problem and instead created an economic one. The Zentharian ambassador raised a trembling wing. High Chancellor, what are they doing now? Vorthak's laugh was hollow. Last I heard, they've established something called Humans for Hire. Your problem is our solution. Their advertising slogan is we'll fight anyone, anywhere with anything. They're offering package deals. Package deals? Squeaked Councillor Nim Era. Military consultation, tactical improvisation, and what they call creative conflict resolution. They're booked solid for the next 6 rotations. Apparently half the galaxy wants to hire them, and the other half wants to hire them to fight the first half. The chamber erupted in panicked murmurs. Order. Order. Vorthak slammed his gavel again. The decree stands. Humans are banned from warfare. What they choose to call aggressive negotiations or kinetic diplomacy is, unfortunately, outside our jurisdiction. He paused, looking around the chamber one final time. Meeting adjourned. And may whatever deities you worship have mercy on us all, because the humans certainly won't.